Tokyo, 1943. The city was cloaked in an uneasy calm, a fragile silence suspended between the distant echoes of bombings and the unspoken dread of what was to come. Gray clouds hung low over rooftops, as if the heavens themselves mourned the violence that humans were preparing to inflict on one another. In a secluded barracks on the outskirts of the city, a group of women, barely more than girls, shuffled forward, their footsteps muted on cracked concrete. They had been rounded up under the guise of routine medical examinations, yet fear clung to them like a second skin. Among them, 21-year-old Haruko Tanaka clutched a small satchel containing nothing more than a scrap of cloth and a faded photograph of her family. Her fingers trembled, and she could feel her pulse thudding in her throat, a steady reminder of the peril surrounding her. Rumors had already spread among prisoners. The so-called doctors did not offer care, but conducted secret experiments, exposing women to pathogens, testing physical limits, and performing procedures that left survivors scarred or broken. The girls whispered to one another in anxious, broken murmurs, the words barely audible over the metallic clang of the barracks gate. The gates creaked open, and uniformed men beckoned them inside. Haruko's stomach twisted. The air was heavy with the smell of antiseptic, mingling with the faint, acrid smoke of distant fires, carrying a scent that seemed almost alive with menace. She glanced at the others. Some faces were pale with fear. Others masked their terror with blank, numb expressions. A tall man approached, clipboard in hand, his stoic gaze scanning each girl as though she were an object, not a person. "Step forward," he commanded. Haruko obeyed, each step echoing in her mind like a countdown. The satchel slipped from her grasp as her hands shook uncontrollably, and for a moment, she wondered if she would ever see her family again. The interior of the facility was sterile, cold, and unwelcoming. Fluorescent lights reflected harshly off steel tables and the rows of instruments lining the walls, each one gleaming ominously, a silent promise of pain. Haruko's eyes darted to the other women, noting 19-year-old Aiko Sato trembling violently as a nurse adjusted her uniform with mechanical precision. The women were separated from one another, their personal belongings confiscated, leaving them stripped not only of material comfort, but of the familiarity that offered even the faintest sense of security. Haruko's mind raced with the stories she had heard. Women who had been deliberately exposed to diseases to test immunity, others subjected to surgical procedures without anesthesia, and some never returned from the examination rooms, their fates whispered about in hushed tones. Every shadow, every creak of the floor, and every footstep seemed magnified in her perception. Outside, the distant rumble of Tokyo, bombs, she guessed, barely penetrated the reinforced walls. Yet it was a reminder of the larger world still burning, a war that was not just around them, but part of the very air they breathed. The man with the clipboard moved with relentless, methodical attention, noting every reaction, every hesitant glance, and every subtle tremor. Haruko felt trapped in a new reality, one where the room, the men, and the quiet terror of the other prisoners had become her entire universe. Time inside the barracks lost meaning. Minutes stretched into hours as women were questioned, examined, and occasionally tested in ways that defied both logic and compassion. Haruko's senses were heightened, absorbing every detail: the smell of sterilized metal, the cold touch of instruments, the low hum of ventilation, the faint rustle of papers as the doctors documented each observation. Fear coiled in her stomach like a living thing. Yet beneath it grew a fragile thread of defiance, the instinct to survive no matter the cost. She noted the slight hesitation of one nurse, the flicker of uncertainty in a young guard's eyes, tiny cracks in the otherwise impenetrable facade of authority. These small observations became Haruko's secret arsenal, a way to predict, anticipate, and perhaps endure the unknown. Her thoughts returned constantly to her family, her mother's quiet smile, her father's calloused hands, her younger brother's laughter. Each memory became a talisman, a shield against despair. The other women clung to similar fragments, whispering stories of home when the men were not watching, seeking solace in shared humanity, even as the barracks attempted to strip them of it. Rumors of previous experiments hung over the women like a storm cloud. Some had been injected with substances designed to test endurance or resistance. Others had been isolated, starved, or exposed to extreme conditions. The uncertainty was as damaging as any physical pain, and the tension between fear and hope became a daily struggle. Haruko noticed that each woman developed coping strategies: controlled breathing, mental counting, silent prayers, and tiny, private rituals that grounded them. Some memorized sequences of movements to maintain a sense of agency. Others spoke softly to themselves to preserve sanity. Even in this artificial, sterilized world, life, or some shadow of it, persisted. The will to survive, to bear witness, and to protect one another became a hidden force more potent than the fear imposed upon them. By the time the examinations concluded for the first group, Haruko realized that the barracks had become a place of paradox, a site of terror and control, yet also a space where human endurance, observation, and quiet resistance were tested in equal measure. The women, though broken in spirit at times, carried within them sparks of survival, resilience, and the faint but persistent hope that somehow the nightmare would end. Each day brought fresh trials, but also the opportunity to study patterns, anticipate danger, and nurture the small, almost invisible acts of defiance that could preserve life, dignity, and humanity. The narrative of Haruko and the others was one of constant negotiation between fear and courage, oppression and observation, despair and the unspoken belief that survival itself was an act of rebellion. In this secluded barracks on the outskirts of Tokyo, under the shadow of war, the secret experiments continued, but so too did the quiet, persistent heartbeat of resistance within each young woman. The narrative of Haruko and the others was one of constant negotiation between fear and courage, oppression and observation, despair and the unspoken belief that survival itself was an act of rebellion. In this secluded barracks on the outskirts of Tokyo, under the shadow of war, the secret experiments continued, but so too did the quiet, persistent heartbeat of resistance within each young woman. Reality was reduced to the room, the men and the quiet terror gripping her fellow prisoners. Days blended into nights with little distinction, a relentless loop of fear, pain, and enforced stillness. Haruko and the other women were subjected to countless tests, injections with unknown substances, exposure to extreme cold or suffocating heat, and invasive examinations that left them weak, feverish, and sometimes delirious. The doctors spoke little, their voices clinical, monotone, almost inhuman, as though the women were specimens rather than human beings. Yet amidst the brutality, fleeting glimpses of humanity sometimes emerged, a nurse whispering that survival often depended on remaining calm, a shared piece of food tucked secretly into a palm, or a gentle look exchanged between women before the staff returned. Haruko clung to these fragments as evidence that not all around her were cruel, a thread of hope woven into the tapestry of fear. In the dark hours, She retreated into memory, recalling her family, the small home near the river in Kyoto, the soft sound of her mother's voice, the way sunlight fell across the wooden floors. These memories became her shield, a fragile but necessary barrier against despair, a reminder that life beyond the barracks still existed, waiting for her to survive. The hours of experimentation were long and exhausting, each one a careful choreography of observation and endurance. One morning, Haruko awoke to a procedure she had not seen before. A team of men, masked and silent, guided her into a room filled with charts, syringes, and unfamiliar machinery, whose purpose was clear only in its clinical precision. The experiments had become more invasive, now measuring physiological and chemical reactions with scientific rigor. Through the thin walls, she could hear muffled cries of other women, sounds that resonated in her chest and reinforced the terror surrounding her. Despite this, she could not entirely surrender to panic. The careful, methodical approach of the scientists, meticulous, organized, almost detached, allowed her to find a sliver of mental space. She focused on observing, recording details in her mind, cataloging events as though she were a witness to a natural phenomenon rather than a victim of cruelty. This mental discipline became essential, a lifeline that allowed her to endure physical suffering without losing her sense of self entirely. Weeks passed, marked by repetition, pain, and subtle acts of defiance. Haruko and Aiko formed a quiet bond, a tenuous connection of solidarity and whispered encouragement. They found small ways to nurture one another, sharing hairpins, folding scraps of cloth into tokens, exchanging silent gestures that carried the weight of unspoken hope. Each gift, each word, became a statement of presence, a refusal to disappear entirely in the sterile, controlled environment. The doctors continued their experiments, sometimes claiming the procedures were for vaccines or treatments, sometimes leaving nothing but pain in their wake. In response, Haruko developed strategies for survival, focusing on breathing, memorizing schedules, noting names and patterns, and mentally cataloging every detail she could remember. The act of keeping these memories, of tracking procedures, became a form of resistance, a way to assert control in an environment where control had been stripped from her. In the quiet hours, Haruko began to keep a mental journal, recording in vivid detail the events of each day. She memorized the names of staff, the timing of injections, and the sequence of each test, believing that if she survived, these facts must one day be told. This mental exercise provided structure, a way to impose order on chaos. Each observation, each detail, was a small victory over the randomness of suffering, a way to ensure that the truth of what had occurred would not vanish with time. Aiko and Haruko occasionally whispered fragments of hope to one another, speaking of home, of gardens, of families waiting in distant cities. These whispers were fragile, yet they reminded them of the world beyond the walls, a realm untouched by needles, fever, or observation. Even as their bodies weakened, their minds found resilience. Haruko discovered that survival was not only physical, but psychological, requiring attention, discipline, and an ability to find meaning amid suffering. The experiments continued, relentless in their repetition, yet within the routine, she found small cracks through which life could seep. Every memorized detail, every shared glance, every secret journal entry became part of a larger strategy: to endure, to witness, and to survive. Haruko understood that her survival was a quiet act of defiance, that living itself was a way to resist the dehumanization imposed by the barracks. In the darkness of each night, she clung to this understanding, finding in it the strength to face the next day, to endure the injections, the examinations, and the sterile terror with a heart that refused to break completely. By late 1944, the war had shifted in ways that reached even the secluded compound where Haruko and the other women were held. Rumors filtered through the walls and corridors, whispered among guards, and occasionally overheard by prisoners. The Americans were advancing across the Pacific, the Japanese Empire faltering, cities falling under bombardment. The tension in the compound was palpable, a fragile layer of fear overlaid with a spark of uncertain hope. Haruko noticed subtle changes in routine. Procedures that had once been methodical now felt rushed. Records that had been carefully maintained were hastily scribbled, and some prisoners disappeared quietly, removed without explanation. Each disappearance added a heavy weight to the air, a reminder that survival was precarious and that control could vanish in an instant. Yet amid the terror, a strange sense of possibility lingered. Perhaps the outside world would intervene. Perhaps liberation would come from forces beyond the walls, or perhaps from within the fragile human networks that had formed in secret. Haruko clung tightly to Aiko's hand as they were transferred to a new section of the facility, away from the harshest of the experiments. Their shared grip a small but powerful anchor in a world designed to strip them of all security. The new section offered slightly improved conditions, though the memories of prior horrors remained vivid and haunting. The screams, the sharp sting of needles, the cold gleam of metal tables, and the clinical indifference of the staff were etched permanently into Haruko's consciousness. Each day was a careful negotiation between endurance and observation. She measured the timing of tests, memorized routines, and watched the slightest changes in the guards' moods, learning to anticipate danger before it arrived. Survival became a disciplined practice, conserving energy, regulating fear, and maintaining the faintest reserve of hope. She and Aiko shared strategies in whispers, exchanging knowledge about the procedures, the reactions of the women, and the patterns of the staff. Every scrap of information became a tool, a fragment of power in an environment that sought to eliminate agency. In these small, clandestine acts of communication, they reclaimed a piece of their humanity, asserting presence and memory in a world intent on erasing both. The final months of captivity were a blur of relentless anxiety, endurance, and sharpened instincts. The doctors, pressured by the crumbling war effort and the diminishing capacity of the empire, grew erratic. Some exhibited fleeting moments of pity or hesitation, subtle reminders of the human potential for empathy even in complicity, while others became obsessively meticulous, determined to preserve the data at any human cost. Haruko learned to read these fluctuations, to adjust behavior, and to create mental buffers against despair. She and Aiko became not merely participants in the cruel experiments, but keen observers and chroniclers. Every procedure, every reaction, every detail was memorized and cataloged in their minds, forming a covert record that could one day reveal the truth. This act of mental documentation became both a survival strategy and a moral imperative, a quiet form of resistance that ensured their suffering would not vanish into silence. Haruko's resilience was tested in countless ways: the physical exhaustion from repeated injections and extreme temperature exposures, the psychological strain of constant uncertainty, and the ethical weight of witnessing cruelty to friends and strangers alike. She discovered that survival demanded both patience and ingenuity. she learned to modulate reactions, to minimize physical signs of distress, and to identify the rare opportunities for small acts of kindness. Sharing a scrap of food, offering a reassuring glance, or quietly assisting a fellow prisoner during a procedure. These gestures were minor in the moment, yet profound in their affirmation of shared humanity. Even the simplest acts became revolutionary in an environment designed to erase identity and instill fear. As the war approached its final stages, a tentative hope threaded through the barracks. Haruko and Aiko held on to it tenaciously, aware that the collapse of the empire might bring liberation, yet understanding that freedom, if it came, would not erase the trauma endured. The meticulous mental records they kept of experiments, staff behavior, and conditions represented both survival and testimony. A promise to the world that the truth, however horrifying, would not remain hidden. The women's endurance, ingenuity, and quiet resistance transformed them from passive victims into witnesses, observers, and chroniclers. Even as the physical and emotional toll mounted, their courage persisted, a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure unimaginable adversity while preparing to bear witness once the darkness finally lifted. In August 1945, the war finally ended. The streets of Tokyo were scarred, rubble lining avenues once bustling with life. Yet the most profound discoveries lay hidden within secluded facilities scattered across the country. American forces, advancing into territories long controlled by the Japanese military, uncovered buildings where women like Haruko had endured unimaginable suffering, subjected to cruel experiments that had been meticulously documented by those who conducted them but denied to the world. Haruko was freed, along with other prisoners, her body fragile, weakened by months of starvation, injections, and relentless procedures. Yet her spirit had survived. She clutched Aiko's hand tightly as they stepped into sunlight for the first time in years. The brightness almost overwhelming. The sky above Tokyo remained gray, heavy with the weight of the past. But now it carried a fragile promise of renewal, a signal that life could continue beyond the walls that had held them captive. Haruko felt the warmth on her face, the scent of air untarnished by antiseptic, and realized that freedom, though delayed, had finally arrived. Every step she took forward was both literal and symbolic, a movement away from the horrors of the past toward a world that might. With care, recognize and remember what had occurred. The memories of the barracks and the secret experiments were indelibly etched into Haruko's mind. Each detail mattered. The precise arrangements of the instruments, the cold gleam of steel, the whispered guidance of sympathetic nurses, the bonds of solidarity formed in silence. She had witnessed pain and fear so profound that simple acts of survival had become revolutionary in their significance. Every name she had memorized, every subtle shift in procedure, every cry muffled by walls of steel and concrete, carried meaning. Haruko understood that these recollections were more than personal history. They were evidence, a record of crimes that could no longer remain hidden. She was determined to ensure that the suffering of herself and her fellow prisoners, the courage and ingenuity they had summoned in the face of dehumanization, would be known to the world. Liberation had granted her freedom of body, but responsibility now fell to her to liberate the truth from obscurity. Years later, Haruko began to speak publicly, recounting her story to historians, journalists, and survivors groups. Her testimony was deliberate and meticulous, balancing raw emotion with the precise details she had painstakingly committed to memory during captivity. She described the experiments, the procedures, and the environment of fear with clarity, while also highlighting the moments of human connection and fleeting kindness that had allowed her and others to endure. Names were altered for safety, but the essence of events remained unaltered, conveying the magnitude of suffering endured and the resilience required to survive. Audiences were struck not only by the horror, but also by the courage displayed by these women, who had navigated terror with ingenuity, empathy, and quiet determination. Through her narrative, Haruko transformed her trauma into testimony, providing a voice for those who could not speak and ensuring that the lessons of history were recorded with honesty and gravity. The revelations about Unit 731 and other secret programs that had experimented on women shocked the world. Scholars, journalists, and policymakers were forced to confront the scale and intentional cruelty of such research, acknowledging both the moral depravity of the perpetrators and the extraordinary resilience of those who endured. Haruko's testimony contributed to a growing body of knowledge that illuminated the intersection of war, gender, and human rights, challenging societies to remember and to prevent future atrocities. Her words preserved not only factual evidence, but also the emotional truth of survival, solidarity, and resistance within the barracks. Each story she shared became a building block in the collective memory of humanity, a testament to endurance under conditions meant to destroy identity, hope, and dignity. Even decades later, Haruko never forgot Aiko or the silent courage of her fellow prisoners. In public lectures, interviews, and private conversations, she honored them, ensuring that their experiences were acknowledged and preserved. Sharing her story was an act of transformation. Suffering became legacy, horror became awareness, and silence was replaced with testimony. Haruko's life after the war was devoted to remembrance, advocacy, and education, reminding the world of the thin line between scientific curiosity and cruelty, and the enduring power of human resilience. In recounting her ordeal, she demanded not only recognition of past atrocities, but also vigilance for the future, insisting that humanity and empathy must guide both science and society, lest history repeat itself in silence. The story of Haruko and the women who survived stands as both warning and inspiration, a chronicle of suffering endured, courage summoned, and the indomitable will to bear witness in the aftermath of atrocity. Historical records reveal that Unit 731 conducted a wide range of cruel experiments, targeting men, women, and even children, under the guise of medical research. Among these atrocities were frostbite testing designed to push human bodies to the edge of death, vivisections performed without anesthesia, and the deliberate infection of prisoners with deadly pathogens to study disease progression. The operations were systematic, highly organized, and carefully concealed, with facilities often hidden beneath legitimate medical laboratories or administrative buildings. Women were not spared. They were subjected to many of the same tests as men, with additional vulnerabilities imposed by gender, including invasive procedures and sexualized surveillance. Haruko's experiences, while deeply personal and narrated through her perspective, align with documented accounts of Japanese women who endured similar horrors, providing a human lens through which to understand the scale of cruelty. Diaries, journals, and testimonies collected in the post-war years recount the fear, deprivation, and ingenuity required to survive, offering a glimpse into the lives of those who faced unimaginable choices each day, forced to navigate between life and death while maintaining mental coherence under relentless pressure. The facilities themselves were meticulously designed to maintain secrecy. Hallways were monitored, access points restricted, and the rationale for experiments cloaked in the language of scientific progress. Prisoners were given little to no information about the purpose or consequences of procedures. Instruments gleamed under bright surgical lights, and metal tables were cold beneath the skin, a constant reminder of the clinical detachment of those conducting the experiments. Even the simplest acts of survival, blinking, swallowing, moving cautiously, required conscious calculation. Yet, within these confines, small acts of resilience emerged. Women shared whispered words of encouragement, traded scraps of food, and found ways to comfort one another in moments too brief for comfort to last. Haruko's careful observation of each procedure, her memorization of names, schedules, and reactions became both a coping mechanism and a form of resistance, an assertion of agency in a world that sought to eliminate it. This mental vigilance was crucial, allowing survivors to retain their identity, preserve memories, and ultimately bear witness to the atrocities that unfolded around them. The psychological impact of these experiences was profound and long-lasting. Survivors often faced lifelong trauma, manifesting as nightmares, flashbacks, anxiety, and persistent fear. For many women, the sense of vulnerability experienced in captivity never fully dissipated, coloring relationships, work, and the perception of authority long after liberation. Yet, Haruko's story, and those of others like her, also demonstrate extraordinary courage. Enduring the experiments required not only physical fortitude, but immense psychological strength, the ability to compartmentalize fear, and the determination to observe, remember, and survive. These acts of endurance allowed women to maintain a thread of humanity amidst calculated dehumanization, offering a testament to resilience that is both individual and collective. The very act of bearing witness became a moral obligation, transforming personal suffering into historical record. Through the testimonies of survivors, historical reconstructions, and archival investigations, scholars and the public gained insight into the full scale of Unit 731's atrocities. The secret programs, which remained hidden for decades, were meticulously documented post-war by Allied forces and researchers, revealing not only the scope of scientific abuse, but also the ethical void within which these experiments operated. Women like Haruko contributed directly to this understanding, providing first-hand accounts that illuminated the human consequences behind abstract statistics. Their narratives exposed the calculated nature of cruelty, the ways in which systematic power was exercised over bodies and minds, and the resilience required to survive and later testify. Each story, each remembered detail, became a crucial piece in reconstructing a history deliberately obscured, ensuring that the world could comprehend both the depth of suffering and the strength of survival. These accounts serve multiple purposes. They are a record of past horrors, a warning against unethical scientific practice, and a testament to human resilience. Haruko and other survivors remind us that while the instruments of power can inflict unimaginable harm, the human spirit can endure and document truth, transforming trauma into education and historical memory. Their courage underlines the importance of ethical oversight in medicine, the protection of vulnerable populations, and the vigilance required to prevent history from repeating itself. By studying and sharing these narratives, modern society honors the lives and struggles of those subjected to these clandestine experiments, preserving their experiences as both a solemn lesson and a beacon of endurance for future generations, emphasizing that remembrance is as much an act of justice as it is of historical scholarship. By weaving Haruko's personal story with historical facts, The narrative creates a powerful intersection of lived experience and documented atrocity, honoring the real victims while providing a compelling account that engages readers on multiple levels. The descriptive scenes of the experiments, the starkness of the facilities, and the fear etched on the faces of prisoners allow audiences to emotionally connect with events that might otherwise seem abstract. Haruko's thoughts, her strategies for survival, and her quiet acts of resistance provide psychological depth that transforms the story from a simple record of cruelty into a testament to human resilience. The narrative's immersive quality stems from the balance between meticulous historical detail and the intimate lens of personal experience, ensuring that the reader not only understands what occurred, but feels the tension, despair, and small victories experienced by those trapped within the secretive walls of Unit 731. Each day described, every whispered exchange between prisoners, and every minute spent observing the guards adds layers of realism, making the horrors both comprehensible and viscerally immediate. Unit 731, headquartered in Harbin, China, operated under the authority of the Japanese Imperial Army, functioning as a clandestine research facility whose work was shrouded in secrecy and denial. Beyond the medical experiments that included vivisections, frostbite testing, and deliberate infection with deadly pathogens, women were subjected to sexual exploitation, forced labor, and extreme starvation tests designed to observe human limits. These additional layers of suffering, rarely discussed in mainstream histories, reveal the full spectrum of cruelty inflicted on female prisoners. Haruko's story, though personalized, aligns closely with historical accounts collected through survivor testimonies, allied investigations, and post-war research, which together provide a more complete picture of the systematic and institutionalized violence that characterized these programs. By including these broader atrocities, the narrative demonstrates that the suffering was not incidental, but an integral part of a deliberate wartime policy. The combination of Haruko's personal perspective with this broader historical context allows for a multidimensional understanding of wartime atrocities. The narrative captures both the physical and psychological toll, the exhaustion from grueling tests, the constant fear of arbitrary punishment or death, and the mental strategies required to maintain hope and agency. Haruko's ability to document, observe, and mentally record events serves as a form of resistance and as a testament to the importance of memory in the aftermath of trauma. The small acts of solidarity between prisoners, whispered encouragements, and the sharing of limited resources illustrate that even in the most controlled and cruel environments, human connection persisted, offering strength and meaning where official systems sought to erase it. Through these details, readers gain insight not only into what happened, but also into how individuals endured and adapted to unimaginable circumstances. Each survivor's testimony contributes critical evidence for historians, helping to confirm the scope and nature of the atrocities, while also emphasizing the importance of remembrance and documentation. Haruko's story, fictionalized in some aspects for narrative cohesion, functions as a lens to explore these historical truths, allowing audiences to grasp the personal stakes behind abstract historical facts. By combining emotional engagement with factual accuracy, the narrative ensures that the legacy of these women is preserved, that the complexity of their suffering is acknowledged, and that future generations understand both the human cost of secret experiments and the moral imperative to prevent their recurrence. Historical events gain urgency when filtered through lived experience, transforming academic knowledge into empathetic awareness. Ultimately, this narrative approach achieves multiple objectives, It educates audiences about the hidden atrocities of Unit 731, highlights the resilience of those who survived, and fosters a moral reflection on the ethical responsibilities of science, military authority, and society at large. Haruko's story exemplifies how storytelling can illuminate the intersections of gender, war, and human rights, giving voice to the invisible and ensuring that the consequences of historical secrecy are neither forgotten nor repeated. By intertwining descriptive, psychological, and historical layers, the account becomes more than a story. It is a vehicle for remembrance, a tribute to courage, and a warning for the present and future, emphasizing that even in the darkest circumstances, humanity persists through memory, testimony, and moral witness.